We're halfway through Star Trek Picard Season 3. The 5th episode of the 3rd season is titled Imposters, and deals with the consequences of the changing infiltrating Starfleet and specifically the USS Titan-A. As such, and you would expect, paranoia and deception are growing among Admiral Picard and the crew. Also, we've got the return of someone who is rather close to Jean-Luc for a time. We've got to discuss the conversation surrounding their cameo appearance as it hits home. Alright, let's dive into episode 5, Imposters. Spoiler warning, this is our full review of Star Trek Picard Season 3, Episode 5. Turn away now if you've not watched. I mean it. Welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host Captain Jack. Now, if you're excited for Star Trek Picard Season 3, make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. Oh, and don't forget, this week will be live on YouTube at 9 PM GMT on Sunday, so tune in then if you want to watch our live show and get your questions answered about this episode. Or ask them down in the comment section and we'll read through them on air as well, so that's pretty cool. Now, as a heads up, we'll structure this review a little bit differently. Sadly, Paramount copyrighted our last one. Yeah, so there may be a little bit less footage. I do apologise, it's just one thing we've got to do now apparently, because heaven forbid we share opinions on Star Trek on the internet apparently. Anyway, engage. The episode starts with Jack Crusher in a Starfleet uniform going under the bridge, killing everyone, and seemingly infecting people with those red branches. Obviously this turns into a dream, but when he wakes up, he has a phaser and his eyes turn red. Last week, we're going to spoiler warning something here by the way, we're going to mention it, so skip ahead by 10 seconds if you don't want to hear this now. Jack's visions of the subtitles were labelled the voices of the Borg Queen. But this week, the voice sounded the same and the voice were labelled as Beverly, so who they are and what they might be, we don't know. He does later in this episode have to wear a uniform to hide in plain sight. While doing this, he sees a hallucination while some crew members are beaming over to the Intrepid. Considering the Changeling was transporter tech, he could have infected the transporter system to make them more Changeling human hybrids perhaps? Something's going on here. Late in this episode, there is even mention that people do not trust the transporters due to fleet-wide issues for the last 4 months. Jack later in the episode even somewhat activates his Red Door hallucinations to take out a whole Changeling squad, after having visions of shooting everyone around him. So it does seem handy in this situation, but what does it mean? Personally, with the Borg Queen subtitle from last week, it might have something to do with Locutus of Borg. It was picked up massively last week that Locutus was the most deadly Borg ever to get a name. So could this be Jack somewhat activating his latent Locutus nanoprobes, or something he gained from Picard when Picard was still human? Finally, after all these hallucinations, we at least don't get Jack hiding for multiple episodes, and he does confide in his mother, but something is wrong when she asks him. So where's our plotline heading? We'll have to keep watching to find out, as I don't know with this one, it's confusing. Starfleet has been imaging personnel before reporting for orders since the Dominion War to account for changelings. It is nice that the impacts of the Dominion War are still being felt. Since we first saw the new changing goo effect, people have been wondering whether it was just updated VFX or something new. It seems like this episode confirms it is something new, by the fact they can now bypass blood tests and other Starfleet anti-changeling security systems. An amazing scene in this episode is Dr. Ock and Crusher doing an autopsy on the changeling body, which for some reason retained the body of LaForge upon death, instead of returning to liquid form. I do have to say, I could watch an entire episode of Beverly doing her space doctoring. She even removes some of the changeling's organs, which look like organs but do revert to their changeling biomass under intense dissection. She comes to the idea that it's evolution, and now it's even harder to find out who a changeling is, or who they aren't. After we arrived last week, we returned to Raffi and Worf who are training on La Serena. We also learn that even though Worf is a subcontractor, he also has a handler within Starfleet Intelligence, who we later learn is Laren. The duo get denied official access to investigate Daystrom and are told to find an unofficial way on board the station. Daystrom is protected by an AI system, which is interesting that they're using AI systems knowing how Control turned out in Star Trek Discovery, so I hope we have more protections in place. Kryn, who is Worf and Raffi's next lead and turns out to be a Vulcan criminal who's a kingpin of a Valash crime family. It's very fascinating to see a Vulcan crime boss, someone who still uses logic, but we've seen this before. We've seen Cyborg and other Vulcans who've turned away from Vulcan society, and most recently in Strange New Worlds, with the Yakesh Tankaltil, and the rehabilitation centres. That was an attempt at pronouncing that. God knows if we got it right, we'll find out in the comments. Worf and Raffi decide to fight, because Worf is willing to sacrifice much to deal with the changing threat, even if that includes Raffi. Raffi may have defeated Worf, but we know this isn't the case, all the trailers show other scenes of Worf, so the impact of today is a good day to die doesn't really work well if you watch the trailers. I know, it sucks. Eventually this was revealed to be a ruse, which was really well done, and they managed to capture Kryn, who then explains Daystrom Station. We actually get a look at Daystrom Station, which is essentially just a kit bash design of Jupiter Station with two Midas arrays attached to its exterior. We'll go over this in a breakdown video, and we'll send Lieutenant Commander Adam to go and talk to you about it later in the week. We have seen this station in trailers with the USS Titan there, which is probably how Worf and Raffi plot will interact with Picard and how they'll get on board. We do see the room which from the end of the Part 1 trailer had B4 and Law's body in storage, but in this room we see their containers are empty, which is interesting. Kryn gives Worf and Raffi a device which allows them to sneak on board Daystrom, and is presumably their next destination. Finally, we will leave Metalis Prime after so long on the planet because it really is a shithole. I should give more emphasis to that one there. It's not that bad, but come on, it's kind of bad. They're using telephone wires in episode 1 for Christ's sakes, like, it's a bad planet, God. A new starship, also designed by Bill Krause, appears in this class, and it is called a Dudstud class. I'm so sorry if I pronounce that. Dudstud class? Dudstud class? Yeah, it's called the USS Intrepid. I do believe this is named in honor of someone close to the production of Picard, but I've not verified that just yet. I'll get back to you on that one when we do the official breakdown. It is very unique design with an underslung secondary hull, and I can't wait to see more of the design. It does seem to be the most Changeling infested ship compared to the Titan. Possibly because it is the ship sent to deal with the Titan and retrieve Jack Crusher, with perhaps Vadic informing the other Changelings. So of course, they would load the Intrepid with as many Changelings as they could in order to capture Jack. The security officer of the Intrepid is Laren. She seems to have finally returned to Starfleet after a Maquis stint in the Next Generation. Picard naturally seems very angry for Ro having betrayed him and joining the Maquis, and the scenes between Ro and Picard are some of the best this episode has to offer. And after watching Battlestar Galactica many times, I can't help but see Michelle Forbes as Admiral Kane. Just being honest. They asked how she managed to escape prison after serving in the Maquis, and it seems that a particular story is being told in the brand new comic series, Star Trek Defiant, which had foreknowledge about Star Trek Picard. So if you want to know more about Ro's story from Maquis to Starfleet, read that comic. So if you don't want to read that comic, she does give a good enough answer here, that she turned herself into Starfleet before the Maquis were wiped out by the Dominion, and she was recruited out of prison by Starfleet intelligence for her knowledge of terrorist groups. A large element of this is whether Ro is saying who she is or not, or whether she might be a changeling. She cuts herself, but as we know, the changelings do have the ability to mimic blood. Picard brings up a good point that Ro isn't wearing her earring, and whether this is her turning away from another institution, but later on we do find there is a meaning to this, and her earring has other purposes. Another return to 10 Forward in this episode, and I do hope we don't see 10 Forward again for a little while. It does get quite stale when we have basically seen it in every episode from flashbacks and the real thing and the holodeck. Give us vintage 10 Forward, how about that? They had it for season 1, we can do it again. And this time it's on the holodeck again as Ro and Picard go in to hash it out and confirm each other's identity. She says the walls have ears, which is somewhat true. Maybe a starship does have ears. We get a standoff between Picard and Ro, as not the only one's conflict in the present, but also in the past from the Next Generation and Ro betraying Picard, if you remember the episode. If you don't, I'd recommend going and watching it. Now, it's a smart move from Ro, using emotional pretense to figure out that Picard is not a changeling. Something that's also good for these two are reconciling, they divided them in the past. It's a great use of writing, might I say. Ro is used in this episode to tell the audience how infected Starfleet is by the changing infiltration. We learn of other ships that have had changing issues, but these have been silenced by Starfleet. Picard asks if they should contact Admiral Janeway, which is nice, and I do hope Kate Mulgrew does return in some capacity for this series. Obviously we saw a connection between Janeway and Picard in Nemesis, and Seven mentioned that Janeway and Picard got her into Starfleet. So they do seem to have a good working relationship, and Admiral Janeway appears to be active and still high up in Starfleet, so... Ro's security team was compromised, and they put a transport inhibitor on her shuttle and a bomb. Instead of evacuating the shuttle, she decides to sacrifice herself and fly her exploding shuttle into the Intrepid's port nacelle, therefore giving the Titan a fighting chance to escape and run from a conspiracy that is now claiming her life. It's very confident and strong in this episode to bring back a character like Laren, a fan favourite, and kill her off in order to service this conspiracy. We'll have to see how fan reaction is to this. I felt it works well. I'm sure some people will be upset about this, but it does raise the stakes by having a character we know die from this conspiracy and give a life for the cause. She had given Picard her Bajoran earring, which Riker shows is where she was keeping her entire Changeling investigation files. It includes all the ship incident reports, suspected changelings, the personnel files of Sneed and his accomplices, and the attack on a recruitment center. There was even a report from the Fenris Rangers, probably connecting to the Shrike, which Seven said was reported by the Rangers. Even everyone in the Starfleet chain of command has probably been infiltrated and replaced. I couldn't actually make out names on this list, but maybe someone will be able to enhance it on Twitter. Tweet at me if you do so. Obviously, we can see the Enterprise F, the Captain Garrett statue, but I can't see anything else. It's really hard to get details. So if you can enhance on Twitter, send it over to me at CaptainJackYT. Troy will put my editing thing on here now, my Twitter thing. Dan, here. No, there. It's going there. Here? There, it'll be there. Finally, we get a communication between Worf, Picard, and Riker. I guess through Worf, they will both learn that they need to head to Daystrom, and that is where we'll be heading next week. This episode, Imposters, was written by Cindy Appel and writer Chris Derrick, while directed by Dan Lau. The crux of this episode was the interaction between Ro and Picard. These are two characters who had this relationship in The Next Generation and ended with betrayal. We see from the get-go that Picard being very angry towards Ro, and Sir Patrick Stewart sells this very well. Michelle Forbes reprised her Ro's role. As we get under the holodeck and into the more emotional charge elements of this episode, she really plays herself into the shoes of Ro and brings out that emotion. Again, I do see Admiral Kane from Battlestar Galactica and, the Exer or CEO of the Pegasus, but that's just me. This may be the end of Ro Laren, but what a way to not only bring back everything that made Ro great and deal with the consequences of her actions towards Picard, but give her an explosive send-off. Too soon? Jonathan Frakes continues to be great in this episode, though isn't heavily centered in this episode. He did just have two of his own, so that is fine, as we have so many characters and he's already had so many great scenes, as I just mentioned, so for him to take more of a back foot in this episode does make sense. Shaw is a very interesting character in this episode, being very chippy and happy that his whole ordeal is finally over, and then being roped back into it happened to be public enemy number one against the entirety of Starfleet. He just wanted to get back to a normal, easygoing life, and now he's been dragged unwillingly into the wild adventures of Picard. He makes a lot of references to events of all the movies, such as All Good Things, which is obviously coming from him, saying that Picard broke the Prime Directive just to snog a Baku woman. This was obviously Star Trek Insurrection. From the get-go of hearing Beverly that was going to appear, we got interviews with Gates McFadden where she wanted to say her character was used in the show and not how she was used in the movies, which is not the case at all. She brings the Doctor A game and pushes the plot further, yet still having those mother moments with her son, which are rather touching. All in all, this was the midpoint of the season, and is very much heating up. It seems we are heading to a Daystrom station, but what will both our crews find there, and who will Starfleet be sending after them next? I hope we get a cameo from a captain or something like that could be really cool. So what do you think of Star Trek Picard Season 3 Episode 5? If you want to keep up to date on all the latest Star Trek news, lore and more, make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media or join our community Discord server. But for now, I've been Captain Jack, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you later on in the week. Live long and prosper, my friends. Goodbye.